Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another installment of our weekly program, Analyzing the Address, where we revisit the khutbah and talk about it in a little bit additional detail, and also offer you the opportunity, if you so choose, to offer any feedback, ask any questions you may have, and even critique the khutbah if you would like. And the title of yesterday's khutbah was "The Believers Frequent Masajid Allah," or they frequent the Masajid of Allah. The believers frequent the Masajid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this khutbah, it's centered around the concept of Imarat al-Masjid, and the duty of the believers to be Ammar al-Masajid, as indicated by the two verses, number 17 and number 18 of Surah At-Tawbah, which read, مَا كَانَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ أَن يَعْمُرُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ شَاهِدِينَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ بِالْكُفْرِ أُولَٰئِكَ حَبِطَتْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ وَفِي النَّارِ هُمْ خَالِدُونَ إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَى الزَّكَاةَ وَلَمْ يَخْشَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ فَأَسَىٰ أُولَٰئِكَ إِن يَكُونُوا بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these ayat, He says what means it is not proper that the idolaters should maintain the masajid of Allah while bearing witness to their own disbelief. Those people, their deeds have become null and void, and they will abide therein forever. They will abide in the fire forever. The masajid of Allah are only maintained by those who believe in Allah and the last day, establish prayer, give the required sum of charity, and fear none except Allah. Those are sure to be among the rightly guided. And we open the khutbah, brothers and sisters, by citing the sabab nuzul al-ayatain. Sabab nuzul al-ayatain. We mentioned the precursor to the revelation of these two verses. And we mentioned that some of the leaders of Quraysh said to a group of the Prophet's companions, لَنَحْنُ أَفْضَلُ مِنْكُمْ أَجْرًا وَلَا أَحَدٌ أَفْضَلُ مِنَّا إِنَّا لَنَعْمُرُ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَلَنَحْجِبَ الْكَعْبَةِ. That some of these leaders from Quraysh, these pagans, the nobility of the pagans of Mecca, they said, "We are better than you Muslims in reward from Allah. No one is superior to us. We visit and maintain the sacred mosque, and we decorate the Kaaba, draping fine cloths upon its shell." And at the what I want to do is mention a point about this sabab an-nuzul, and that is that this statement from the pagans is very significant in the sense that it shows that even these pagans, who they didn't have a scripture from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they didn't have guidance from Allah that told them that honoring the masjid, maintaining the masjid, caretaking for the masjid was something which was virtuous. But they understood this instinctively. They understood the virtue of taking care of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and considered doing so both an honor and a privilege. And this is without guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They understood this instinctively. How much more so should we as believers understand and appreciate the virtue, the merit, the excellence of taking care of the houses of Allah when we have the Quran? We have Allah's guidance in the form of the Quran, in the form of the Sunnah, in the form of the statements and the practices of the pious predecessors of this ummah. When we have all of this guidance that tells us and points us in that direction, we should have an even greater appreciation of the virtue, the merit, the excellence of Imarat al-Masjid. Consider it a badge of honor. Consider it a privilege to do so. And so when we look at the Quran, we have this ayah. إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said the believers are the ones who will do this. They are expected to be Ammar al-Masajid. So Allah is giving us this guidance in the Quran that this is something that we should consider a duty. something that we are expected and obligated to do. On top of that, when we turn to the Sunnah, we see the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith of Aisha, he commanded that the Masajid be cleansed, that they be kept clean, and that they be fragranced and kept and maintained, or that a fresh smell be maintained in the Masajid. We also see the Prophet ﷺ didn't command us to do something that he himself wasn't prepared to do. So we also find the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, once he entered the Masjid, and he saw on the wall of the the Masjid, he saw some nakhama. He saw some spittle. Somebody had actually spit on the wall of the Masjid. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell someone, hey, come get this and clean it up. No, the Prophet himself went to that spittle and scraped it off the wall with his blessed hand. Sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And the companions after him and the early Muslims, they took that mantle, they took that from the Prophet ﷺ, and they took that badge of honor and they wore it. They wore it with great pride. So we have the athar where Umar al-Khattab, he entered the masjid of Khutbah, and he offered rak'atayn. He prayed 2 units of Tahiyat al-Masjid, greeting the mosque in the Masjid of Khutbah. And then he asked for a branch of a palm tree. And you guys know what a palm tree looks like. Basically, if you have a branch of a palm tree, it's almost, you have a broom, right? You have a broom. The way that the end of the leaves of the palm trees, kind of poke out in 2 separate directions. And so he took that branch of a palm tree and began to sweep up the Masjid of Quba. And he was the Khalifa at the time, radiyallahu anhu. And we also have narrations from some of the great scholars of the past, like Ash-Sha'bi, al-Bukhari, that they also were keen that every time they would enter a masjid, they would make it a point to remove whatever was unclean or unsightly from that masjid. And so I say all this to say, brothers and sisters, that this is something which we as Muslims should wear as a badge of honor. We should not consider it beneath us to clean the mosque. Beneath us, if we see some lint or some cobwebs or something on the floor or the wall of the masjid, to take our own hand and pick that up and remove it. If the masjid is in need of vacuuming, we'll take the vacuum and we'll go ahead, and we don't have to be appointed or paid, compensated for doing so. We will do that. We will clean the masjid, neaten the masjid. If we see something that's out of place in the masjid, it's one way, but it should be a different way, then we will go ahead and take it upon ourselves to fix that. Why? Because we understand it's part of we're expected as individual believers to do this imarat al-masjid, and part of that is keeping the masjid clean and maintaining its upkeep. It's also important, as an extension of that we instill the utmost respect, care, and concern for the upkeep of the masjid in our young ones, in our children, in the future generations of Islam. So we, typically Muslims will bring their children to the masjid, and sometimes what happens, unfortunately, is that those children will come to the masjid and they will make a mess in the masjid. And they are children, and they're doing things that children typically do. And there's no harm. What many people will do is say, well, they're kids, just let them be kids. And that they are kids. And we do have to let them be kids, but we also have an obligation to teach them to have respect for the house of Allah. We have that obligation. And so there's no harm in telling them that they can't touch certain things. If they are going to eat, they can't eat in the musalla. That if they do eat in the musalla, that they have to clean up after themselves and make sure that they don't spill anything. If they do, they have to clean it up. We teach them these things. We teach them to have respect for the masjid, to lower their voices in the masjid, not to shout, not to play loudly, etc. We teach them these things just like we teach them when they go to a library to be quiet. Teach them when they go to a doctor's office to be quiet. We should also have the same respect, if not more so respect, for the house of Allah. Teach them to have the same respect, if not more respect, for the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثم بعد ذلك, in the khutbah, we began talking about this word imarat, or this expression imarat al-masjid. Imarat al-masjid. and what it means. And we actually said that what exactly, we asked the question in the khutbah, we said, what exactly does Imarat al-Masjid entail? And we said Imarat al-Masjid does not just mean one thing, it means what? Two things. And we said that typically when we think of Imarat al-Masjid, we think of a physical task. Taking care of the physical structure that is the masjid, maintaining it, keeping it clean, etc. And we said that in reality, Imarat al-Masjid doesn't mean just one thing, it means what? Two things. And so I want to kind of expand on that. First of all, the word Imara, or actually the word used in the two verses, is the verb Amara Ya'muru. Amara Ya'muru. Innama Ya'muru Masajid Allah. Right? The verb Amara Ya'muru, which traces its roots back to one of two verbal nouns in the Arabic language. One of them being the verbal noun that we kept using and referencing in the khutbah, which is Imarat al-Masjid. Imara. Which basically can mean building, maintaining, caretaking, taking care of, upkeeping, right? And it's the opposite. This Imara is the opposite of al-Kharab or al-Takhrib, which means it's the opposite of destroying, ruining, wrecking, undermining. So al-Imara, which is the first root of Amara Ya'muru, it means it's the opposite of wrecking and ruining and destroying and undermining. It is what? To maintain, to upkeep, right? The other root that Amara Ya'muru chases itself back to is al-Umrah wal-I'timar. Al-Umrah wal-I'timar, which means a ziyarah, which is basically to visit or to journey to a place with a specific objective in mind, in this case to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the khutbah, obviously, we focus on the second meaning, which is al-Umrah or al-I'timar, visiting the mosque, and establishing a physical and a emotional connection to the mosque, loving the mosque, as we said in the khutbah, and visiting it regularly so that we can maintain that love, and so that love for the masjid does not fade or diminish. This is what we said in the khutbah. And we spent a lot of time on that meaning in the khutbah. So I think it will be appropriate here in our class, commenting on the khutbah, expanding on the khutbah, that we focus on the other meaning. Imara, which is the opposite of a-takhrib. Imara, building, constructing, maintaining, upkeeping, which is the opposite of ruining, wrecking, destroying, undermining, etc. So as mentioned, we said that Imara is the opposite of a takhrib. Now the former, Imara, is one of the most noble of deeds, while the latter, a takhrib, is one of the most heinous transgressions that anyone can make. Takhrib of the Masajid, undermining, destroying, ruining, wrecking the Masajid is one of the worst things a person can do. One of the most heinous crimes a person can commit. We do that, and it's evidenced by the ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمْ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِي اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَنْ يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. Allah says, who is more guilty of an egregious transgression than him who forbids entry into the Masajid of Allah, that His name, Allah's name, be remembered therein, and he contributes to their ruin. This person who is a transgressor, he prevents that Allah's name be remembered in the house of Allah. He prevents people from coming to the Masjid of Allah, and he contributes to the ruin of the Masjid, at-takhrib. People such as these should not enter the houses of Allah except in fear. For them there is disgrace in this world, and for them there is a terrible torment in the hereafter. طيب. Now, just as the word imara, we've talked about this, we talked about it on the khutbah, we talked about it even so far in our commentary. Just as the word imara has a tangible, physical meaning and an intangible spiritual meaning. The same is true for a taqreeb. A taqreeb is not just something physical. You can only ruin the masjid physically. No, you can also ruin the masjid spiritually, intangibly. So taking care of the masjid, imarat al-masjid, as we said, it has that tangible meaning. It certainly means administering it with fiscal responsibility, cleaning it, and doing periodic maintenance, keeping it in a constant state of repair. That's part of imarat al-masjid, part of the meaning of an imara. But it doesn't just simply mean that. It also means, and this is very important, when we talk about imarat al-masjid, maintaining the masjid, it also means, and we mentioned this in the khutbah, making sure that it serves the purpose it was designated to serve. It's supposed or expected to serve. Making sure that the masjid serves the purpose it was meant to serve. What is that primary purpose of the masjid is meant to serve? The worship of Allah. To be a place where the worship of Allah is established. A place where the words of Allah are taught. The teachings of His Messenger are taught. It's supposed to be recognizing, if we are the people who are ammar al-masajid, it's upon us to recognize that it is Allah's house. So only what He likes and approves of should be done and propagated within its walls and on masjid property. This is part of imarat al-masjid, making it a beacon of Allah's teachings and those of His Messenger. That's part of the meaning of imarat al-masjid. In the what? In the spiritual, intangible sense. Conversely, takhreeb al-masjid. Ruining, wrecking, undermining, destroying the masjid does not merely mean that you administer it with financial incompetence. You allow it to be unclean, or you leave it in a state of disrepair. That's not the only meaning. That's part of the meaning of a takhreeb. But a takhreeb, just like imarat, has a tangible physical meaning and a intangible spiritual meaning. A takhreeb kadalik. It has a tangible physical meaning, but it also has an intangible spiritual meaning. So what it also means is mentioned by some of the contemporary commentaries, for example, Imam Abd'Llah ibn Nasr al-Sa'di and Sheikh al-Imam Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen. They have mentioned that ruining the masjid in a spiritual sense includes allowing innovations, unorthodox, heretical beliefs and practices, and irreligious behavior, all of which undermine the purpose for which the masjid is supposed to be established or supposed to serve. You allow these things to be propagated and practiced within the walls of the masjid, on masjid property, or under the masjid's auspices. So when we talk about, brothers and sisters, running the mosque, when we talk about running the mosque and how it should be run, this has to be part of the conversation. When we talk about running the mosque and imarat al-masjid, people typically, their mind goes where? It goes to fiscal responsibility, it goes to maintenance, it goes to upkeep, it goes to cleanliness, keeping the masjid in a good state of repair. But this intangible spiritual meaning has to be part of the conversation. But unfortunately, often it is not. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about how a person can do takhreeb, or a group of people can do takhreeb al-masjid, even though they keep the masjid in a good state of repair. They take care of the structure, but the spirituality of the masjid, they allow it to die, they allow it to be undone, they allow it to be ruined or wrecked. Right? Now, let's go back and contemplate the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center of yesterday's khutbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا كَانَ لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ أَن يَعْمُرُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ شَاهِدِينَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ بِالْكُفْرِ. It is not proper that the idolaters should maintain the masajid of Allah while bearing witness to their own disbelief. Then he goes on and says, إِنَّمَا يَعْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَى الزَّكَاةَ وَلَمْ يَخْشَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. He says the masajid of Allah should only be maintained by those who believe in Allah and the last day, establish prayer, give the required sum of charity, and fear none except Allah. So what does that teach us, brothers and sisters? It teaches us that there are some people, because of their beliefs and their behavior, they should not administer the houses of Allah. And that certain people, because of their beliefs and behavior, they should. So if there were a person, for example, who said, I don't believe in X or Y in the Quran or from the Quran. They actually literally say this. I don't believe in, yeah, I know Allah says that in the Quran, but I don't really believe in that. Or they say that there are some Islamic teachings, I recognize that they are Islamic teachings, but I can't bring myself to believe in them. That person is doing what? Yashhad ala nafsihi bil kufr. As Allah says, He says, shahidin ala anfusihim bil kufr, bearing witness to their own disbelief. I don't believe in that. Yeah, I know it's from the Quran, but I don't believe in it. A person like that is not fit to administer the masjid. And that teaches us, brothers and sisters, that we have to exercise great care in selecting and appointing administrators. It shouldn't just be something that, it doesn't matter. Whoever's willing to do it, we'll let them do it. We have to exercise care. Why? Because Allah is saying it's not, certain people are not fit, and certain people with certain characteristics are the only ones who are fit. We can't just allow anyone to run the houses of Allah. Character matters. Commitment matters. If we don't select people, brothers and sisters, who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and view themselves as nothing more than custodians, humble servants working on behalf of Allah and doing His bidding. If we don't pick people like this, with this mentality, then the results are likely to be other than desirable. And this is especially true if the appointed individuals, appointed administrators, are irreligious and have little or no concern about doing what is right and avoiding what is wrong according to religion, according to what the religion says. I want to do what's right. I'm an administrator. This is the house of Allah. I'm just a custodian. I'm doing Allah's work. I'm working on Allah's behalf. So how does Allah want it to be done? I care about that. I care about doing what is right and wrong and avoiding what is wrong in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you have someone who's irreligious, they're not going to care about that. They're going to care about doing what feels or appears right to them individually. And I'm not suggesting, brothers and sisters, by any means, that we attempt to examine what's in people's hearts or claim to know definitively who is and isn't a believer. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we are supposed to appoint ourselves as people who can examine what's in people's hearts. We have, like, for example, a special gauge. And we use it to say, believer, non-believer, you can be an administrator, you can. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that there are certain clearly Islamically required beliefs and behaviors that people running a masjid should exhibit, and clearly forbidden beliefs and behaviors that they should not. And Allah alluded to this in the Quran when He said, إنما يأمر مساجد الله من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة ولم يخش إلا الله. Allah mentions specific qualities that they should exhibit. These are the people who should what? Who should administer the masajid. These are the people who should be Ammar and Masajid. The people who are running and upkeeping and taking care of and administering the masajid. Unfortunately, brothers and sisters, it is not uncommon here in the U.S. specifically for people who are unfit according to the Quranic standard to be appointed to administrate the masajid. And I'm going to give some examples that I know from personal experience or which have reached me from credible sources. Just to give examples of what we're talking about, that this is not something I'm saying in bab hyperbole. I'm just exaggerating. I'm sensationalizing. No, these are real examples that exist in our communities where people who do not fit the Quranic standard, they don't meet, I should say, the Quranic standard, are administering the masajid. For example, and it's a true example, in one community, there was an administrator, a board member, who was caught outside the masjid while people were assembling for prayer in his car smoking marijuana. And I'm not talking about marijuana. People start arguing, well, what about it? Maybe it was medicinal. No, it was recreational. Not that that should matter. But it was recreational, and he was doing it outside masjid property as people were going in and out for prayer. An administrator. I'm asking you, does that fit the Quranic standard? Another example. Taking out an interest-bearing loan to fund the purchase, construction, and or expansion of a masjid. And you actually have communities where they will take out an interest-bearing loan to buy land or to build, to fund the construction of a masjid or fund the expansion. And then they'll pay off the loan over a period of time, and then they'll have a deed burning ceremony. They'll pay off that interest-bearing loan, they'll get the deed from the bank, and then they'll have a deed. They won't even hide the fact that they took out an interest-bearing loan to buy, to fund the masjid. Another example, embezzling funds. And you have some administrators who embezzle funds, who will take funds from the coffers of the masjid. Another example, allowing allegations of child endangerment and child molestation to go uninvestigated and protecting the perpetrator. And these are real examples, real life examples. Allowing people to teach, another one, allowing people to teach unorthodox beliefs and practices while prohibiting orthodox Islamic beliefs and practices to be taught. Encouraging people to come and teach falsehood. And muzzling the people who teach truth. These, brothers and sisters, are just a few examples just to illustrate. The point is, brothers and sisters, is that when it comes to Imarat al-Masjid, the who and the how matters. We're all too concerned about the how and not concerned enough about the who, and oftentimes the how is often a direct reflection of the who, which is why Allah provides a list of characteristics. He said, إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةِ. They establish the prayer. وَآتَ الزَّكَاةِ. And they give the obligatory charity. وَلَمْ يَخْشَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And they don't fear anyone except Allah. And this is not a comprehensive list, meaning if they can check these boxes, that's it. Allah is just giving us what? An example of basically a religious person. A person who is outwardly religious. We don't know what's on the inside, but as far as we can tell, the person is upright. Which means that there are some things that a person, there's some outward things that a person should be doing. There are obligations and requirements. There's a specific minimum requirement of how a person should appear, how they should behave, certain rituals that they should regularly perform. If they don't do that, they're not fit. Allah is telling us in so many words and emphasizing it in the previous ayah, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ أَن يَأْمُرُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ شَاهِدِينَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ بِالْكُفْرِ. It's not appropriate for the people who don't believe, the people who are not righteous, the people who are not upright. For them, شَاهِدِينَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ, witnessing against themselves of their own state. They're witnessing they're bearing witness to their own unsuitability. Right? So this is why Allah provides us with these characteristics, and not a comprehensive list, but a list that would allow us to make choices that meet the standard and ensure that the masajid are maintained and not ruined in a spiritual, moral, or ideological sense. And so this is really what I wanted to to hit on and to expand on, this second meaning, the second meaning of imara, and one of the two sub-meanings of this imara. So we talked about how imarat al-masjid, one of the meanings of it that we didn't focus on the khutbah, is maintaining the mosque. And that this maintaining is two types. Maintaining it in a tangible physical sense and an intangible spiritual sense. And really this second one is more important. How do we know this? Because the pagans of Mecca were doing the first one. They were doing it. They mentioned it in the statement that they made, which was a precursor to the revelation of the ayah. They said, Inna la na'muru al-masjid al-haram wa la nahjib al-kaaba. And Allah didn't say they were lying. Allah didn't belie what they said. They were doing those things. They were taking good care of the masjid in the physical sense, but they weren't taking care of it in the spiritual sense. They were spreading falsehood. It was riddled. The Kaaba at that time, Masjid al-Haram, was riddled with idols and false deities. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّمَا يَعْمُلُ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ الْآخِرِ ayah, because they're the ones who are going to run the mosque correctly in a spiritual sense. And that means more to Allah than running it correctly in the physical sense. And this is important because, again, if we make the masjid a place where people can pray only, but they can't really learn their religion and grow Islamically and spiritually, because either we don't have anyone to teach them, or we put people to teach them who don't have the qualifications, the credentials, or they do have, but they also have what? The wrong ideas about Islam. If we do that, we're guilty of what? At-takhrib. We're guilty of ruining, wrecking, undermining, destroying the Masajid. And Allah calls that what? The worst transgression. In the ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah we quoted earlier, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. And who is more guilty of an egregious transgression than the one who prevents people from visiting the house of Allah, denies them ability to remember Allah therein, and they basically make takhrib. They basically undermine the masjid. And undermine the masjid, this doesn't mean that you take a sledgehammer to its foundation. Undermine the masjid truly in the true sense. It means to undermine it, to wreck it, to ruin it, to destroy it in an ideological sense. Spreading falsehood, spreading nonsense, spreading unorthodox beliefs, irreligious practices, etc. It's something for us to think about, brothers and sisters. We have to be the people at this time and in this age, the people who think, who really think. We have to stop being the people who our religion is feelings. How I feel. I like this, I don't like that. This makes me feel good. I'm comfortable with that, I'm not comfortable with that. Sometimes religion is uncomfortable. Sometimes the right thing is the thing that we don't want to do. It's difficult to do, but it's the right thing. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِتَالُ وَهُوَ كُرْهٌ لَكُمْ. Fighting has been prescribed upon you and you dislike it. Allah is talking to the companions, the greatest of Muslims, the best of the Muslims. It was difficult for them, but it was the right thing to do. And this is the same thing here. We got to be the thinking people, not the people who our religion is based upon feeling. Religion is specific guidelines from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a specific way of living and worshiping and believing that will secure salvation for us. It's not about what we feel necessarily. It's about what Allah said and complying. That's why the religion is called Islam, the religion of submitting to Allah, surrendering to Allah. Not doing whatever you feel like, but doing what Allah wills. And part of the way of knowing that is what? Is being people who are rational, thinking people, not always having a visceral response. Oh, I didn't like the way he said that. I didn't like the fact that he said that. Allah wants, coming back to the point, Allah wants certain people to run the masjid. He wants the masajid to be run a certain way. And He wants the masajid to be maintained. Not just physically, but even more importantly, spiritually, ideologically, and morally. And we need to understand that. And once we understand that, we need to act accordingly. And with that, brothers and sisters, we will bring today's session to a close. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always, to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless your children, to bless your health, to bless your wealth, to bless you and make you blessed wherever you may be. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always, to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge and who He allows to practice and take full benefit from that knowledge by making us from those who put into practice. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.